And our next speaker is Karim Krobog, an award-winning filmmaker. He started his career at Time Warner's International Public Policy Office, where he worked with the company's Warner Brothers, HBO, and Turner divisions. His debut film, War Child, chronicles the life story of Emmanuel Jal, a former South Sudanese child soldier who became an international hip-hop artist. War Child premiered at the Berlin International Film Festival and is the winner of over 18 international film awards. Please join me in welcoming Karim Krobog.
Thank you very much. I hope you have all had your lunch, because we're not going to talk about food waste. So I'm glad we didn't do this before lunch, because then it would be much more difficult to eat all this food. My background is a little bit different. I'm actually not, even though I'm a journalist now and do film, I've done a lot of different things, but most of it very global. By background, I'm half Egyptian, half German, born in Singapore, and hence have sort of traveled around the world, and during the journalism years covered a lot of stories in Yemen, India, South Sudan, Liberia, and I wanted to do a story that's closer to home, and I wanted to do a story that actually is solvable. We talked about climate change, we talked about the Arctic, we'll talk about refugees. These are all really important stories, but they also feel somewhat distant. We want to help, we want to do something, but it is further away. So I want to come with a topic that actually has a day-to-day impact on our lives. And I travel a lot. When I travel, I tend to throw away food, like probably many of us do. Fridge is full. What do we do? Let's just chug it away. But food is something that's of vital importance to all of us. And it may seem small compared to all the global topics like terrorism and migration, climate change, refugees, all these things. But actually, food waste does impact all of this. How much food we produce and grow and distribute has an impact on climate change. If you remember, the Arab Spring, the revolution started because of food insecurity and high crop prices in Tunisia. You recall the cart wheeler who put himself on fire and triggered a movement all over the Arab world was because he couldn't afford the high food prices. Same in Egypt, crop prices were high, led to general instability, and then became sort of explosive, like a momentum driver for all the grievances of an entire country. So food waste, think about it not as food waste at home, but as a global topic. I have the really good way that I can show you something, because these are two series that I worked on. I'm curious to get your feedback. Who do you think are the biggest food wasters in the world? Just sort of general sense. Obviously, yes. Okay, who else? So it's pretty much everybody. I mean, the US is the leader in food waste, but not far behind is England, Germany, Australia, Canada. But now, who is the best practice example of food waste? I guess nobody's going to guess this one. France? Nope, worst. Who said South Korea? Good work. That's the only country who has actually managed to practically eliminate food waste. Guess how much food do we waste in the US every year? Yeah, tons is a good guess. More detailed? 40% of food in the US gets wasted. 1/3 of global food production gets wasted around the world. Of 98% of all food wasted ends up in landfills in America. In South Korea, it's 3%. So just to give you the possibilities of, yes, there's a huge problem, but it's also solvable. Climate change impact, I'm looking at the latest numbers. 20% ends up on landfills. The methane that comes out of the landfills is 21% more potent than carbon dioxide. So the ramifications are huge. So I'm going to set up the first film. It's about 8 minutes long. Then we can talk about anything that's of interest, because food waste is a massively diverse topic. And then we'll take a look at the second part of the film, which is in South Korea, to show you that solutions are possible, which I think is also what students care about. They get bombarded by bad news all day long, and they don't know where to start, especially millennials. But they all want to do something. We've seen this over and over again. The millennials is the most engaged generation of our lifetime. But they need to know a problem, and they need to know that there can be a solution. So let's start with Wasted USA.
In the US, about 40% of all the food never gets eaten. And that's everything from food lost on the farm all the way through to the potatoes left on your breakfast platter. Food is either going to a landfill or getting burned in an incinerator. Food is the #1 product in American landfills today.
In 2012, 34 million tons of food, a lot of reusable food was thrown away in the United States.
When you contrast that with the fact that there are over 800 million people around the world who are still food insecure, at the same time, 1 in 6 Americans is considered food insecure. It's really kind of a moral tragedy.
There is a huge consequence to deal with the societal problem of hunger, but also it has a huge consequence in terms of the environment.
If food waste were a country, it would rank 3rd in terms of its greenhouse gas emissions.
Methane is a huge climate change problem, and that landfills are a tremendous contributor to that methane, which is 10 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide.
The truth is, when you get into it, you're really kind of talking about any inefficiency of the whole food system.
This is Florida Market. Florida Market is where maybe half of the small ethnic restaurants in Washington, D.C. get their food. We're about half a mile from the U.S. Capitol. It's a very light industrial area. There are butchers, there are wholesalers, there are produce sellers. If you come here at 2 o'clock in the morning, you'll find oodles of wasted food. And the problem is this: food goes to waste because it's expensive to transport and to keep cold. If you don't have an immediate buyer for it, the easiest and the most business responsible thing to do is to throw it away. Food Cowboy is essentially an air traffic control system for orphan food. I see you right there. I see you right there. So what'll happen today is a trucker will back up into a field. Workers will fill it with melons, and then he'll make maybe 5 stops in 3 states, and he has about 36 hours to do that. It's going to hit traffic. The next customer will be angry. So everyone is under a lot of pressure to move food quickly and efficiently without any delay. Sometimes there's a sensor in the truck, and the sensor will alert the buyer that the temperature's been out of whack for a certain period of time. The buyer will then call the shipper or the trucker and say, "Don't burn your fuel, don't waste your time coming to town, I don't want it." So what growers say is, if you can't sell the food right away, then get rid of it. They don't get paid for food that people won't buy. The food is perfectly fine. If a purchaser doesn't want to take the food, they don't have to. That means that the farmer has very little purchasing power. If we stopped wasting food, the American economy would go into cardiac arrest.
A lot of people in America are they spoiled. It's an upbringing like thing. They're so used to going to the Safeway, going to the town, getting anything they want. You know, people are really suffering. But America, everybody's, they spoiled. They're used to getting what they want to get. They don't understand what it is to really, really do without. Because, it's the land of opportunity.
We wouldn't be able to do what we do without the amount of food that's wasted, but it really feels like a crime.
Fresh meat, good fresh meat. We do like over 100,000 pounds within a month. This is a big truck. We have 3 of these. Then we have 2 small trucks. So we have enough trucks to bring it in. So we bring in a lot of food, a lot of food.
MANNA is the food bank for Montgomery County, Maryland. We travel to 50 grocery stores in the county Monday through Friday, and we're picking up produce, dairy products, items off the shelf. There is perfectly good food that is brought in here from grocery stores, from farmers markets, that would otherwise go into a compost bin or into a trash. It makes me very angry to see the amount of really good food that's brought in here, either because it has a little bit of a blemish, so people when we see it in the grocery store, we wouldn't purchase it, or it's because the date on the package is such that people think that it is no longer safe to consume. But there's not a lot of education done to let people know that that is just a best by date, a date that indicates quality, not safety. And so the fact that we can keep food on the shelf and then throw it away and it's not getting to people says something about our society and the way we don't really value the work that's done by the people that produce the food and the value of the life of people who aren't getting access to it.
DC Central Kitchen is based on a very simple premise, and that premise is waste is wrong. So all of this delicious product is being plowed back under or tossed in a compost heap just because it's aesthetically or geometrically challenged in such a way that it has little or no commercial value, because it doesn't fit in the right box, fits in the right truck, in the right bin at the grocery store. I got in front of about 100 local farmers. I said, we will buy from you every piece of fruit that you can't sell because it doesn't look right. And the room burst into laughter. It turns out that the amount of that food is so mind-blowingly large that it would be practically impossible. We still can't touch the vastness of what's out there.
So all this food that would normally be thrown in the garbage or wasted, we've now processed this food and we've frozen it and prepared it so that we can get this food in the hands of our most vulnerable citizens here in the nation's capital.
We invite people in to work with us 365 days a year. We want people to see the product that we're using, that it's not bad stuff, that it's not stuff that is dangerous to eat, that this is really good, healthy food that otherwise would end up in the dumpster. But where we're really focusing now, and where the more insidious waste is at the beginning of the food system, particularly on independent farms. 40 to 60% of what's grown on independent farms never makes it off the farm because it's the wrong size.
Gleaning is, harvesting leftover crops that are left in the field that are going to get plowed under, and farms invite us to come out to recover that leftover food. We were at Butler's Orchard, which is a pick-your-own orchard, and today we're going to be picking strawberries. These are strawberries that customers have not picked. They're left in the field, and if we didn't come through today, they would have been plowed under by the farmer. So we thank you for coming out to help rescue these strawberries. All the berries are going to come back to DC Central Kitchen, where they're going to be made into our meals that we send out every day. We send out about 5,000 meals every day using about 75% donated product. So let's grab some bins and let's go pick some strawberries. A funny looking strawberry is just as nutritious as a perfect red one in the fields. I would venture to say these strawberries, because they're smaller and more nutritionally dense, are probably even sweeter and better tasting than the ones you're going to find in the supermarket.
It's hard to get a lot of city people to understand that this is a crop. It grows from middle of June to the middle of July, and then it's over, you can't get any more. Most people in outer suburbs, inner cities, have no connection left with the food that's made. They've never seen a cherry tree, a blueberry bush, a strawberry plant. You go to a grocery store, people just think it's always there.
I don't think we're going to be able to invent our way out of this problem because it is at its core behavioral.
There is definitely enough food produced in this country to go around so that everyone can be fed. The fact that it is not distributed in an equitable manner is the crime. And it's about poverty. It's about distribution of wealth, really, more than it is lack of sufficient food supply.
I think we waste a lot of food because, quite frankly, we're sort of lazy. We, as Americans, have been incredibly fortunate to be part of a food system that is abundant and cheap. And this sort of sets us apart, I think, from a lot of other countries across the world.
I think if you really dig down to what's going on here, it's that people don't value their food, and they don't value it in the way we used to back in our grandparents' day and even today in other parts of the world.
We know that if you throw away food, you lose the invested energy, the invested fertilizer, the invested manpower that goes into producing food.
A gal recently told me this story about dumpster diving and taking bread from behind a bakery into her workplace every day. So every day she'd show up with a few loaves, and one day her coworker from Kerala, India asked, "How do you afford to bring us the bread every day?" And she said, "Oh, well, actually, I get it from behind this bakery." And the woman said, "Well, but do the police know?" And she said, No, I'm sure to go when the police are not there." And the coworker looked at her and said, No, so the police know that they're throwing the bread away. And I thought, yes, that is a society, that is the mindset that we need if we're really gonna not be wasting food.
I love that last story with the that she had with the example from the lady from Kerala. A couple of things. A couple of things that is this working? Yes. Yeah. A couple of things to point out that sort of govern the whole issue about global food waste. There are generally a lot of misconceptions. One is that there's not enough food. If you look at world insecurity in terms of chronic hunger today, it's about 850 million people, and probably slightly more today, given this sort of civil unrest and the wars. But it's about 850 million people who are considered food insecure. I read a statistic, I think it's 1 in 6 Americans is food insecure. There is no such thing as food shortage. There's plenty of food to go around. Food is at core a logistics issue. It's moving food, getting it to the right people. I met with this tomato farmer about 2 years ago, and he was describing that the core of the business is really at the hands of the farmers. If the grocery stores and the procurement managers don't pay until the food literally arrives in their dock. So until then, they are growing and distributing at their own cost. And for example, one of the big retailers, I think it was Safeway, does not accept tomatoes unless it's photo vine. So imagine all the tomatoes that are not photo wine. They get discarded before they even leave the farm. That's about $400,000 of lost revenue for a food tomato grower every year. I think he tells me he plows over 250,000 pounds of tomatoes because it's not photo vine. I mean, these numbers are crazy. We talked about the 40 to 60%, the $165 billion of lost revenues. And that juxtaposed with this food insecurity, this hunger, this poverty, not only in the US but around the world, really raises questions of morality and ethics and so on. The USA Food FDA administrator talked about climate change. I mean, methane gas, we're talking about climate change every day now. There are all these connections that are very seamless but are really important. And I think the idea of how do we consider food and how do we think about it, and you as teachers interacting with young people is really important to sort of get that mindset into place. Then there are the bigger issues that you always hear around food waste. Law, liability. If you ask a restaurant or a grocery store why they don't donate food, I think it's laziness, but they will usually cite legal reasons. There's no reasons why you can't. We talked about this with the gentleman next to me. You can give away food as a restaurant or as a grocery store, no problem, because under the Clinton administration, there was an act passed, the Good Samaritan law, that essentially frees you from liability if you donate food with good intent. It can't be an open container if it's closed, or if it's left over from a restaurant that has not been touched, you can give it away. But liability is always cited as a reason. Who do you guess governs the issue of expiration labels? Anybody? Nobody. It's totally self-regulatory. The industry governs food expiration labels themselves. The only thing that's regulated is baby infant formula. Everything else is up to the standards of the food industry. Expiration labels for contained and closed bins are about 6 years off. If you talk about canned food. Food doesn't go bad unless you can smell it or touch it and see it as going bad. Produce goes bad way beyond what they tell you, especially milk and all these kind of things as well. But again, there's all these misconceptions around food waste. So there needs to be a debate and a re-education in terms of who and how do we look at food. I think the farmer said it very well. Just because we don't grow it ourselves, we've completely lost touch with where it comes from. Moving on to South Korea. This is an amazing story. I don't know if anybody has been to South Korea, but 40 years ago, South Korea was as poor as an African country. Over the last 40 years, they've gotten through a huge economic boom. It's one of I think it's now the 8th largest economy in the world. High tech, poverty quite low. And because it's a highly densely populated place, Seoul has about 25 million people, and there's very little landmass, they had to deal with their own food waste problems. And they've come up with a very unique solution. So I'll show you that, and then I would love to sort of talk to you and see in what direction sort of the questions are.
My name is Jungmin Lee, and I've been Buddhist monk since 2011. For people outside, I think it's really important to think about those people who are dying of starvation. From that kind of perspective, when we see outside people who eat too much and just throw away, it's not acceptable in the monastic life. The idea behind cleaning is very important because we are receiving food from people outside. So Buddhism took the way of not leaving any food behind. When I hit this chukpi, it's literally meaning bamboo stick. It's a signal. It's a signal for people to remind them what they should do.
I was born and raised in Chicago. I ended up moving back here in Seoul about 8 years ago. And I've been teaching out here since.
We definitely waste less food here than we would back in the US, only because there are lots of small traditional markets around here, so we can go there and just buy what we need for the day instead of buying everything in bulk.
Saving foods, this is pretty much embedded into our system. We're just used to it because we've always just grown up this way. My parents are very conservative. We actually have to pay for our food waste.
It helps that there's that law because it helps us be more conscious about it. Because it technically makes sense that you pay for what you throw away. Like if you go to a buffet, you know, some places they're like, oh, if you have leftover food on your plate, then you have to pay extra, and they charge you. So it does make sense, you know. You should be held accountable for how much you do waste, and that'll, you know, help you be more conscious about saving.
So we're throwing away all our food waste in here because if we don't, they're going to charge us.
And they'll actually dig
Big Brother's
through,
watching right
like
there.
If we put it in a different container, and they'll go through the trash, like the bags, and see what belongs to, like especially the ones that are marked.
So for me, when I moved back to America for college, I was still separating all my waste. I was separating plastic, bottles, paper, aluminum, and my food waste especially. And I remember at that time, my roommate threw everything into one bag, and she just took it out to the dumpster. And I remember thinking, what a waste.
우리나라는 예로부터 푸짐한 상차림을 선호하는 음식 문화 특성상 다른 나라에 비해서 많은 음식물 쓰레기가 발생하고 있었습니다. 런던 협약에 따라서 2013년 1월부터는 은폐수 해양 배출이 전면 금지될 예정인 상황이었습니다. 그래서 정부는 음식물 쓰레기 줄이기를 위한 특단의 조치로 음식물 쓰레기 종량제를 전면 시행할 계획을 수립했고요. 전국의 인구의 99%가 거주하는 144개 지자체를 대상으로
송파구는 68만의 인구가 거주하고 있는데요. 약 29만 세대, 29만 명이 이제 공동주택 아파트에 거주하고 있습니다. 그 2 창을 보면 85%가 지금 차 있는 거고요. 이 기계를 보면 77%가 차 있습니다. 지금 시각 보면 오전 4시인데 거의 가득 차 있는 상태입니다, 이게. 주민들이 오면 이 카드를 여기다 태그를 하면 이렇게 뚜껑이 열립니다. 그리고 여기다 음식물 쓰레기를 붓고 이 카드를 다시 태그를 하게 되면 뚜껑이 닫히면서 버린 양의 무게가 여기에 기록이 됩니다. 이 무게가 기록이 된 양은 무선 데이터를 이용해서 환경공단 서버에 축적이 됩니다. 이거를 월별로 축적이 돼서
그래서 RFID 방식은 정보를 이제 무게를 정확하게 측정을 해서 그 배출원마다 이제 배출량에 따라서 무게를 측정하고 그 정보를 전산 중앙에 있는 전산 시스템으로 통보를 해서 전산에서 관리하는, 그리고 전산을 통해서 그 배출량에 따라 버린 만큼 수수료를 계산해서 사용자한테 직접 부과하게 되는 그런 방식을 구상을 하게 됐습니다.
9만 명에 대한 약 50%가 지금 현재 이런 상태의 기계를 사용하고 있고요. 나머지 부분 50%, 약 50%는 금년 말까지 이 장비를 설치해서 주민들도 편하고 음식물 쓰레기도 감량할 수 있는 기회를 만들려고 합니다.
우리나라에서 예전에 못 살 때는 이 음식 낭비라는 게 없었습니다. 어쨌든 그 최대한 먹을 수 있는 거는 다 사람이 남겨서 먹고, 가난했던 시절에는 밥도 쉬면은 물에서 말아서 먹었을 정도로 그런 낭비가 없었는데, 또 이제 우리나라가 조금 이제 어느 정도 살다가 보니까 굉장히 어떤 낭비를 많이 하고 있다.
Cream of mushroom soup, our most popular cream soup in Korea. Quite a large size hotel even for me. I travel around the world. I've been to big places, but this one, especially with the meat consumption, I was shocked to import 1.7 tons of beef tenderloin a month for this hotel alone. And this one is mainly used in our wedding venues. The Koreans are so efficient. We have 856 people are turning up to a wedding. We have 857 steaks cooked. Right now we're having a 450 banquet mid-sized Korean wedding going on with a menu what charges about $80 to $90 a person. It's a very prestige wedding to hold it in a five-star environment. Very fast, and that needs to be efficient and it needs to be fast. So normally we do that in about 45 minutes. But we do have actually a system in place where outside company is managing our garbage, especially the wet garbage we call it, what is all the food wasted, and it's being picked up on daily basis. Refrigerated here and then being picked up and being used for different purposes later.
그 우리나라의 음식물 쓰레기는 그 수분 함유량이 한 80% 차지할 정도로 수분 함량이 많습니다. 이걸 이전에처럼 매입을 하게 되면은 거기서 그 침투수 형태로 나오는 그 폐수 부분이 있습니다. 이 부분이 이제 토양에 스며들어가지고 토양을 오염시키게 되고, 또 이게 음식물이 썩는 과정에서 이 악취가 굉장히 심하게 납니다. 그러다 보니까 유해 곤충이나 이런 부분들이 또 많이 발생하게 되고, 그러다 보니까 어떤 그런 환경적인 오염이 발생할 수 있습니다.
음식물 폐기물의 하루의 반입량은 360톤이며 수거된 음식물은 파봉 파쇄 공정을 거쳐서 다시 진공 쿠커 및 건조 공정을 거치고 음식물 폐기물 중 사료 제품으로 만들어지면 10% 정도 만들어지고 있습니다. 약 36톤 정도입니다.
그렇게 직매를 금지되면서부터 정화가 비약적으로 발전했습니다. 랜던 협약에 가입한 그 국가들이 이 해양에 그 오염물질을 투기하는 것을 점점 이렇게 없애가는 과정에서 저희 나라도 그 협약을 충실하게 이행하기 위해서 은폐수의 해양 배출을 금지시키게 된 겁니다. 그래서 지금은 그 은폐수를 전량 다 100% 육상 처리를 하고 있습니다.
1매립장을 조성할 때는 1매립장을 매립할 때는 음식물 쓰레기를 같이 매립을 했습니다. 그게 2000년도까지 1매립장에는 음식물 쓰레기가 포함돼서 매립이 됐고 2000년도 이후부터 2매립장이 조성이 되면서부터는 음식물 쓰레기를 여기 수도권 매립지 공사에는 들어오지 못하게 되어 있습니다. 지금 음식물 쓰레기 종량제를 우리나라에서 사용을 하면서 매립지에서 이렇게 큰 매립지가 세계적으로 없고 발전을 해서 하루에 전기를 생산하는데 매립지에서 발생되는 가스를 가지고 50메가와트를 발전을 합니다. 하루에 발전하는 이 최대 규모 50메가의 규모의 발전소를 갖고 있는 것은 저희 7밖에 없습니다. 그러니까 세계적으로 단일 규모로서 매립가스를 활용한 발전소는 저희가 최고의 규모입니다.
That hotel is pretty amazing. We were staying at this, working with this Marriott hotel chef, and they do 6 weddings, 45 minutes each wedding, with a break of 15 minutes to reset tables. It's pretty spectacular. So they'll start at 9 in the morning, and they'll churn out 6 weddings a day for pretty much the entire city of Seoul. And people come, leave their gifts, have a quite quick meal, and leave, and the next wedding gets set up. Like 4,000 or 5,000 people there easily, and they import an unbelievable amount of food for steaks and lobsters. This is a very sort of nice hotel, and it's sort of the destination place to have wedding for sort of the upper class of South Koreans. And I was like, there's no way you guys are not wasting food. And every Sunday they have these like champagne brunches, they call them. It's like a very hip thing to do where it's open bar, open food, you pay like $60 and it's all you can eat. And the spread is as big as this room here. And I was like, there's no way you guys are saving this, not throwing away this food. And he took us into the kitchen. And it is immaculate. You can eat off the floor. And everything gets picked up, taken away. And I think this is the real amazing story about South Korea, is they have figured out that waste is not waste. Waste is money. And they have figured out how to create jobs through waste, to convert it into biofuel, animal feed, and fertilizer. Created entire new supporting industries and economies, hire people, reclaim land. And it's really quite an amazing success story. This country 40 years ago looked like, the example we saw in some places in Africa. Poor, has had this incredible economic driver and was really thoughtful about how to deal with their big problem, which at the time was food waste. Koreans are very much a very sort of generous society. Food is part of everyday life. When you sit down, before you even have ordered anything, you get 15, 20 kimchi side dishes. Before you order your main courses, and they realize this is crazy. We can't keep throwing away all this stuff. Now the advantage in South Korea, of course, it's very strict laws. I mean, try passing any law in the U.S. Now it passed a law about food waste that has sort of implicit taxes. That's sort of a no-go situation right there. Technology, they work with all the local telco providers to monitor the waste system. When a garbage bin is full, it gets the garbage company gets notified, gets picked up. And the way it works, there are 3 ways to capture food waste. One, you buy a plastic bag, and you put your food waste in there, and then you pay essentially what you pay on the plastic bag is your tax. They figured now we're creating plastic bag issues. Let's get rid of that. Little containers with barcodes, and your barcode essentially is how you get billed. And the new system, which is called the RFID, which are these super high-tech, Star Wars type garbage bins. And you collect your food, you dump it in, it weighs your garbage, you swipe your card, and you pay at the end of the month. And it depends how much you waste. It's not that expensive, maybe between $5 and $10 a month. But for Koreans who remember the really poor days, $5 to $10 a month is a monetary issue, but it's also sort of a very mental memory thing from their own recent history. So what South Korea really shows is that food waste is solvable. It's a problem that with thoughtfulness and merging technologies, education and awareness can actually be addressed. So I thought it was a really compelling case to feature, and they've gotten very, very little credit for it. So I figured this would be worth sharing in one of these projects. There's so much to talk about when it comes to food waste. Maybe if there are any questions, and I can sort of take the conversation in any way you want. Yeah, go ahead.
No, so I was interested to see what happened in South Korea, because at the school where I work at now, there's a comment that just always stuck with me that I heard that the students said, and then I had to tie the pieces together over the course of 2 years working at the school. So the kids would always say, "Thank you, Michelle Obama," and I'm like, why do you say that all the time? And it has a lot to do with the very conservative teacher that we have, who kind of says things to the students, and the students kind of buy into that. And it has a lot to do with like the vending machines and the fact that now you just can't get any kind of junk. You wanted a vending machine, that there are these rules and things that happen. So I kind of again, I'm just like, why are you guys so angry about that in the first place? So when I see what happened in South Korea, like I'm trying to make the connection, just like what things did you see from traveling there that you think could actually be done here? Because you mentioned taxes, obviously there'd be a lot of resistance to doing that. But if young kids were so opposed to having junk taken out of vending machines, what are some things that that we can kind of take back to the classroom and maybe try to do based on what you saw, things that maybe you saw are like that if we just try, maybe that's something that we can do here in increments.
That's a really good question. I think part of it is awareness. I think I had no idea about the scale and scope of food waste before I started on this project. I knew it was bad. I knew that I'd throw away food. You go to a grocery store. Look at when anybody goes shopping, you see the apple. You're like, this apple is a little funny looking. Oh, this banana is a little dark or brown. Yeah, I don't want that. So you are the last instance in already a huge procurement process. The grocery store has already eliminated 80% of the stuff that's there, and you are the last instance of picking what comes from the shelf into your bag. When you throw away food because you travel or because it looks bad, none of us like doing it. That's the beautiful thing about with food waste is it really hurts. You feel compelled. You don't like it. Many of us have probably grown up with the comment by our parents like, "Eat what's on your plate." And you're like, "Oh, should I pack it up and send it to Africa?" We have that. We've always been raised with the idea that food waste is a really immoral or bad thing to do. And I think where I really do see the hope is that the younger generation, the millennials, and sort of the yoga-obsessed culture of today feels very compelled to already be much more mindful about food consumption and food. So I think awareness. There is a budget thing. We waste about $2,500 per household of 4 on foods that we never consume. That's $200,000. 10 years at $25,000. It adds up. So I think talking about the money purse, I think is a good issue. One guy in the first part makes this comment about the economy going into cardiac arrest, and I didn't really quite get what he meant until we dug deeper. The food lobby is extremely powerful, and there is money to be made on food that doesn't get thrown. Imagine we eliminated food waste. There would be so much money lost within the food industry, and that would actually have, according to his belief, a major economic impact because of the revenue turnover of these stores. So I think, to summarize, awareness. It's a topic that hurts. We have all sort of been confronted with it at some point. Vending machines. Good for Michelle Obama, because I think getting rid of these, this processed food is obesity and all that kind of stuff is a natural connection.
I like this idea because what's important right now is that we have to educate people about it.
Yeah.
And I think the school is an ideal place to begin. I've never seen more food waste in school than I had no school lunch when I went to school.
Yeah.
I had to pack a sandwich and sit on it. When I get to eating it was so small I swallowed it in one bite.
Yeah.
It wasn't that. But what is happening, I look at even in high school, where kids should be cognizant of the importance of food and cost, that they go through the line, take the food, and dump it at the end. And then go and buy a cup and drink it. They have no sense of nutritional values. And I think this is a program that could be introduced to the whole school system as a whole, because we'll save tremendous costs and increase the teachers' salaries.
Agreed. Yes, please.
Can I actually connect to that in the comment earlier about like Michelle Obama? I think with the, like I'm raising questions about like has the Healthy Foods Initiative actually created more food waste? Because like those rules that passed like were supposed to make school lunches healthier, but in my experience, most of my students don't like that food, and it's like it comes in a little container and it's microwaved, and I've seen a lot of their lunches and I've never wanted one. You know what I mean? And that's the food that they're given, and they go through the line and they do dump it. But it's like I don't think it's like a lot of them wrote research papers about how that food isn't nutritious at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's very high in sodium, it's high in fat, and it's being passed off as healthy. You know, so it's just sort of it's like there's laws in place that I think are creating food waste. You know.
I think you're right. I think you know, according to Congress, pizza is a vegetable, right? You know, where does the debate start and where does it begin? And there are a lot of, I mean, it's a whole separate way to look at it. You know, food is actually highly addictive. You know, processed food is highly addictive because of the sugar in there. So there are a lot of tangents on why that reason is. Why don't we want healthy food? You know, there's a PR and sort of consumer drive element as well, where we're constantly bombarded with all this food on television and in the media and so on. So it all plays a role. But you know, there's no easy solution. So yes, you can take the tough line. So that's what's for lunch. No vending machines. No soda, all that kind of stuff. It's only healthy food, and eventually, when there's nothing else to eat, that's what you'll eat. Or it becomes, you start at the awareness level where you're really educating about the impact. Because I really do think that especially younger generations, if you tell them don't do this, they'll break the rule. If you tell them don't do it because, you know, climate change, poverty, hunger, think of the, you know, 1 of 6 hungry Americans, I think that triggers thought effect, and I've seen that repeatedly with other projects that. Nobody wants to be lectured to, but if you give the reasons and you walk them through the process, that the awareness starts sort of seeding into the mentality of behavior. But yeah, I mean, you have to start somewhere, and there's no easy way out. So I totally appreciate your point. And in terms of increased food waste from healthy lunch, I've heard that before. I've talked to others who say no, that's actually not true. One-on-one, it's actually has reduced food waste, but it's so hard to come across like real statistics that govern that.
Go back to the FDA regulations for
Yeah.
foods and safety dates.
Yeah.
That was like fully shocking to that. And we see the dates on packaging. So that's my question. You said that it's not regulated. The safety dates, I think.
Yeah. I will come back to that.
It's a little different. So my family is migrant workers, and I have this long history both working and then facilitating agricultural workers. I know that in this country right now, public sentiment is very, shall we say, hostile against most of those workers. Who actually does most of the agricultural work in South Korea? Is it South Koreans, or is it a group of migratory individuals like you?
Okay. If I forget, remind me, please.
I think it also goes back to the priorities of our society. Getting back to the school lunches, I don't know how it is. I'm assuming it is in most of the other school districts. I know in Chicago, you have just a few large food companies, food vendors that distribute not only in schools, but also in prisons and hospitals. And in terms of the food quality, it determines how much the school district wants to determine per student. And that's why food has to be so bad in terms of the taste, the quality. So I think, again, maybe a lot of it gets wasted because, again, it just doesn't taste good. It doesn't mean it's not good for you, it just doesn't taste good. But if you can make good food taste good, then students will probably use it and it won't go to the garbage.
Here and then here, yes.
Yes, I'd
taking
like
notes
to
for you.
hear your thoughts about practical solutions to this problem that could be applied here in the United States. Do we start with local level policies? You know, we've had success in eliminating shopping bags, plastic shopping bags in certain cities and municipalities. Could we apply, you know, similar kinds of policy changes to make people more sensitive to the cost of waste by perhaps charging them, as they do like in Japan and other countries, special prices for shopping bags or garbage bags that they need to use in order to throw out their waste? Are there those kinds of solutions that you think could be applied here in the United States?
Okay, I'll get to that.
Yeah, I think that in terms of solutions, if you could address, I mean, regulation and policy versus what has been suggested, a change in culture and mentality. Because even when you try and put in helmet laws or seatbelt laws, you know, click it or ticket, it's really people, you know, I mean, they don't really change their behavior and just getting the laws passed
Can I start with those?
Yeah.
No, because I'm not going to remember.
And you know, just for time's sake, do me a favor, please. Will you write down your question? Kareem is here till the end of the day.
And
so.
I'll try to be quick. Expiration labels,
Yes, there you go.
ignore. Just ignore them. They're bullshit. They're totally nonsensical. They're completely made up. They're off. They haven't been updated since the 70s. In terms of, they were supposed to. What was sort of the term that they used? Best by dates. That's language from the 70s, but it's totally unregulated. It's made up, so you can ignore that. There's always this misconception that food will lead to, and I'm sure there's somebody who's going to challenge me on this, that you can get sick from bad food. I'm told by nutrition experts and doctors you can't get sick from bad food. You get sick from food that has been contaminated with other food, like if you put a chicken next to salad and that's raw. I've been told repeatedly by a nutritional expert that you cannot actually get sick from bad foods. Food is bad when it tastes bad, looks bad, smells bad. Otherwise, it's not bad. So go home and keep your food. Regulation policy. I'm German. Apparently, we really like regulations and laws. So I guess in America that doesn't really work because anything that looks like a tax or feels like a tax, smells like a tax is dead on arrival. I would love some sort of law on food regulation. It doesn't have to be super stringent, but I think given all these global topics and all the connections between, hunger, poverty, climate change, terrorism, all that kind of stuff, it all comes down to food security in many ways. It's the only reason, but it's part of the reason. And I think there's a national interest about coming up with some sort of sensible laws that either update the expiration labels or use grocery bags. I was recently in Rwanda, and when you arrive in Rwanda, they take all your plastic away from you at the airport because they don't want any plastic waste in East Africa. That to me makes sense. I think awareness, smart education, education, smart laws make sense to me. So I would love to see something along those lines. South Korea and workers. South Korea is very homogeneous, so most of them are actually South Koreans. You don't find a lot of people from the outside work. There's some Thai workers, some Malaysian, but mostly South Koreans. What am I missing? Oh, awesome, thank you. Solutions. I think you make a really good point. I worked on a film about child soldiers and the impact across young kids, saying like, why is this happening to their parents? And the parents like, can you please address this question? My kid's asking me about child soldiers, and I got like hundreds of emails from kids on this. I think kids really drive issues like this, and the younger you start, which goes back, I think, to some point you raised, the younger you start, the better. I think the way we behave and consume is fundamentally changing. So the younger we start, the awareness, the more sense I think it makes. So I really believe in that. I'm missing one from the first.
I think solutions was part of
Yeah, solutions it's a really tough one. I go back. I believe in sort of some sort of regulatory system, updating expiration laws. We talked about the mining companies. I mean, food companies to me are very much sort of using the same method in terms of like really powerful public interest organizations who are able to influence laws. I think it's a consumer issue. If consumers change their way they buy, behave, consume, distribute, and talk about these things, industry tends to adopt. There is on the state and city level, there are changes now with the soda law. I believe in New York. So I think it's a combination of all of the above. There's no silver bullet to it, but ultimately, what I love about this issue, if the consumer changes, the industry has to change. There's no way. So I think it has to be driven from there. Have you heard of doggy bags in restaurants in other countries? Yeah, I mean, doggy bags are an American phenomenon, but they have crossed over to everywhere in Europe. 10 years ago, if you asked a German in a German restaurant or a French restaurant, can I have my food to go? They would say no, but you can leave. And now it's very common, and I think it makes sense. Why you've paid for the food, it's really good, and eat it for dinner or breakfast or lunch or whatever you like. It's a really, really good question. Seoul is easy because half the population of South Korea lives in the greater Seoul area, 25 million out of 50 million. And of course, you have just 20 kilometers away, you have North Korea, which is a totally different story. But in South Korea, the laws are fairly nationwide, increasingly. This is very much governed about Seoul. I'll get to the US part. Very strong national laws, very strong national government. The US, of course, is very different because of state governments. And food, I believe, is governed on a state level, besides the larger US USDA policies. So what you see now, California is very much cutting edge in terms of curbing food waste. The way food is collected, repurposed. You see local initiatives on state and even city level and community level, but there's no sort of unilateral unifying system across the US. Garbage collection, recycling are all state issues, not national issues. The government, DC will dictate you have to collect and you have to, I think, get it to a collecting site within, I don't know, 10 or 15 miles or something like that, but everything else then it gets relegated to the state level. Good and bad. The good is that communities and cities and states can come up with really innovative stuff, and it's happening, but not even close to the scale of the problem. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I'll be your last one.
I think one of the aspects of cultural change has to do with the culture of empathy.
Yeah.
In order to have it work in America, basically you have to translate it into the language of greedy capitalism. Empathy is good for you. Otherwise, if you say you have to empathize because people are going hungry, I mean, in this very city, we have thousands of people who are homeless, who are food insecure, and people just walk by and it's careless.
So there's a, okay.
I mean, in that sense, I think there's a way in which you have to talk about changing the way how people relate to the other, in this case, food insecure or those who are hungry here and in other places. And based on my own experience, I feel like it has to be re-narrated in a way that it is good for you. You'll feel good about yourself if you empathize with the other. Otherwise, it doesn't seem to work.
I agree with you, and I think food waste is highly visceral. You walk by a garbage container or a bin, or you're throwing away food in a restaurant, I would imagine everybody sort of feels like, I really don't like that, and you think about it. So I think there's that emotional connection right away. I don't like using this quote because it's not, I don't like making that statement because it's not possible, but if we collected all the food waste everywhere in the world, we could feed essentially world hunger. You could feed every hungry person in the world 6 times over every year. That's how much food we waste. Now, of course, you can't collect food in Chicago and send it to Malawi. I mean, that's highly impractical. But just to give you a level of scale and scope of the amount of excess food that exists. So I really appreciate your point.